Welcome, everybody. My name is Katie Cleesby, and I'm the founder of Rexpert, a website where you can find recreational activities and recreational coaches near you. We sponsor our weekly Wellness Wednesdays every Wednesday at noon for kind of your lunch morning sesh if you're on the West Coast. And we highlight different speakers and experts in our community, and we have different topics. And this week, we're really excited to host Embracing Solitude, why doing things alone is important. And we have our special guest speaker, Dawn Geschiere. She is an empowerment coach, a speaker, facilitator, writer, founder and CEO of YesToLife Coaching. And she's going to dive into some great content today and gain some insights from her. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I am going to go ahead and mute myself. If you can mute yourself until Dawn opens it for discussion, that would be great. Thank you so much. I'll let you take it away.
Well, hello, everyone. I am here in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, to be exact, on Bainbridge Island. So I'm living in the state of Washington, formerly from Northern Virginia. And I am so thrilled to be here with you. And it's really interesting to be showing up as an expert on solitude and being alone. But actually, I do feel like I'm pretty much an expert one way or another. I am 63 years old, and my current life circumstances and my stories all through my life have brought me to a place where I do spend so much time alone, and I absolutely love it. Most of the time. Do I get lonely? Yes, absolutely. In fact, sometimes I'm extremely lonely, especially since I moved to Bainbridge Island, and I find myself building all new community. My two oldest daughters are in Seattle, and so of our 5 adult children, I chose to come and live by them, near them. So that's why I'm here. But Seattle is a ferry ride away for me. So I'm on the island building brand new community with everyone, and it's very different. So do I know about being alone? Absolutely. One of my favorite things to do when I am alone is to walk through the Grand Forest. I live within a 3 to 4 minute walk, and I am deep into the forest by then. And that is amazing to me. I've been a nature lover. I'm curious whether you love nature as well. So, one thing I want to say about you and I is this. I always like to say that me, myself, and I really enjoy each other's company. I'm one of my best friends. So what about you? Do you find your own company to also be rather delightful? What is it that you love about yourself enough that you might call yourself a best friend? And maybe you're showing up today and you certainly don't feel like you're your own best friend and you don't enjoy your own company. So there's a coaching question that I love to ask. It's very fun. It's very lighthearted. And this is not offensive, I hope, to any of you who might be in sales, because it's this silly question. Well, if you were a greasy salesperson, what would you be selling? What would you want to sell? If you were a greasy salesperson where all you did was try to sell people on this particular product or this particular service. And for me, the answer to that question, if I answer my own question, what if I were a greasy salesperson, what would I like to sell? It would be selling solitude, really, and convincing people that that's what it's all about. So in this photo, I had breast cancer. I was going through breast cancer, and this was taken during chemo. And I was out for a walk in the woods. And while I was out walking, I was so happy to be with myself on this particular day during chemo. And I took this photo of myself, and you can see the delight. So I also would be a greasy salesperson to convince you that even if right now you would not say you love your own company or you're one of your best friends, that it takes a lot of practice, a lot of experience, a lot of just intentionality to develop this delight in yourself, to love your own company. You yourself, you have a you yourself in you. And I'm here to talk to you about this and encourage you to become that lover of solitude as I am. So, what's your go-to way to spend alone time? I just put 4 up here. There's a myriad of ways you could spend your time alone. But when you get some alone time, do you love spending outdoor time?
Sorry,
In the
Dawn. Are you, do you think I think you showed the picture. We're not seeing your screen. I want to, if you think are you sharing your screen when you said you put 4 up here?
Yes, my screen is, I'm still in the presentation just as I was.
Okay. So I wasn't sure. We can't see your screen.
Oh, that's strange.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed here for me. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just ask you what's your go-to way to spend time alone, and then we'll go, after I tell you the 4 that I have up here, I will go to the next screen and see if you're able to see it. So one would be spending outdoor time in nature. Maybe that's something you love to do. That's your go-to. Or maybe it's exercising, something active that you love to do when you're alone. If you get alone time, is it screen time? That's your go-to. You go right to some sort of a device or a screen. Or is it creativity? You do something creative, you create something. Is it reflection time? So those are just some of the ways to spend time alone. And I'm really curious what your go-to is. So Katie, let me know if you see this screen. Do you see a screen?
No. Do you have more than one monitor? Because sometimes it's showing.
No, I only have one monitor. It's my laptop. So this is very strange because I'm still in the presentation.
So at the bottom, did you on Zoom hit share screen?
Oh, so you have not been seeing my screen all along.
Right. We didn't get to see the picture of your breast cancer moment. And
Oh, thank you for letting me know that. Here, you are so right. I was the one that was supposed to be sharing my screen first, and I jumped right in. All right, we will get to the place where I can share my screen, and I want to share this. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, back to present. There we go.
hey, yes, awesome, much better.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. So I'm going to actually just quickly go back to the first slide for you. This was the very beginning of the presentation, and we won't need to spend any more time there. And then the reference of the picture, the photo, is right here of me with breast cancer walking through the woods. And then this was the screen I was referring to with the 4 things where Katie said, wait, if we're going to be looking at 4 options to choose from to spend our alone time, we would like to see those. So I'm so glad you interrupted, Katie, and let me know that. I hope that you answered this question already. And then where do you place yourself in terms of introvert versus extrovert? And then maybe you're an ambivert, which is a term that's become quite popular right now. It's used a lot. I hear many say it. In fact, Katie has said it of herself, an ambivert, I believe. But really and truly, you tend toward possibly one or the other. Which are you? We like to think of alone time and solitude in relationship to introverts, which is a big mistake. I took the Myers-Briggs years ago and was off the charts toward the extrovert side of things at that time. But I realized that even though that's how I fell out, this full-on extrovert, I really was always going with these solitude practices that I had in the mornings, even when we were raising our 4 and 5 children when they were young. I would intentionally give myself plenty of solitude, sometimes an entire day. I would simply let go of the 5 that we were raising, and I would sit by myself or go downtown Chicago when we lived there and go to a library downtown Chicago and spend my time alone, go out for lunch alone. It was delightful. So somehow I think I was an ambivert, even though some personality test placed me on the extrovert end. So let's think all as ambiverts during the rest of our presentation. And then what I'd like to do is to tell you that anyone, all of us as ambiverts, or all of us as human beings, can develop and practice solitude. So what I did here was intentionally wrote to you that solitude practice really is what it's all about, practicing solitude. You could put either word in front. And here are some ways, if you're not a lover of alone time or solitude time, you may be, I want to acknowledge all of us have had different experiences. I want to be trauma informed when I speak of anxiety or definitely this kind of alone time that makes us afraid and we are alone and we get anxious. And when we're talking about trauma response, I want to name that because it happens and in our lives. And for some of you, being alone might be daunting. I'm looking forward to our discussion at the end of this because I really want to hear from you questions and I want to hear about your experiences in being alone. But you are able to practice being alone. You really are completely. So what I want to encourage you to do is different things here. And this list could have been, this slide could have been filled with so many different ways to practice solitude and to be alone. And here are just some of them that I wanted to share with you, which is, the first is a solitude list. Making yourself, when you're in a good headspace, a good heart space, just making yourself a list of all the things that you love to do that you think you might be able to enjoy alone. And that solitude would also include things like that you've always wanted to learn about, things you've always wanted to do or try, but make yourself an all-encompassing solitude list. Have an accountability partner or 3. Just find people that when you're going to be spending a lot of time alone, you are definitely, you have a partner that will hold you accountable. And this is especially important if you tend toward just this default button of your devices and screen time. Have you ever had that experience where you have this time to yourself and you've got this window of time, and all you do is you go right to your screen. For me, it's playing Sudoku, right? And so I get hooked on certain games on my phone or Sudoku, and that can become a default. So have an accountability partner that you share your list with, or you share your ideas about what you'd really like to do all alone, and let them hold you accountable. If you decide to brave it and go out in public, that top middle one there says out in public and self-management. If you decide to go out solo, and everything in our culture, the societal norms tell us that going out alone is uncomfortable. And often we talk in our culture so much about being part of a partnership, a couple, or being part of a group. And we actually encourage that, promote it. I go on the ferry a lot. I shared that with you earlier. And when I'm on the ferry, I see so many people who are both alone, but also who are with groups and families or in a couple. I am newly divorced, and it's after a 42-year marriage. And as you can imagine, being newly divorced and then also living on an island since September, where I'm building my community in and of itself, I tend to see these people having fun and in relationships or together with someone, or if they're holding hands, these partners in front of me. I have to self-manage. And so do you, because going to a restaurant by yourself, going to a movie by yourself, it's very different to experience that alone. And it's a matter of convincing ourselves and then having an accountability partner, even if it's really difficult. And also knowing you might be out in public, and even though you've self-managed, even though you told yourself you weren't going to focus around being, quote, jealous of those who were with others, you might have that creep up when you're alone. And just understanding it's okay that you do. It's going to happen. You are going to experience feelings of, oh, I so want what that group is experiencing. I so want what that couple over there looks like they're experiencing. And then it may help to just look at a particular two people out and about in public, and actually they're both on their devices. Or a whole group might all be on their devices. And that might be helpful to you to go, oh, it's about connection, meaningful connection. Everything is. And solitude is about meaningful connection with yourself. Having experiences by yourself that are very, very meaningful to you, that where you're connecting to yourself. Remember, if you're working toward delighting in yourself, in being your own best friend, in knowing yourself inside and out, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it, if that's what you're hoping for, to learn about yourself, and at age 63, I'm still discovering incredibly new things. So I put some other ideas here: learning, writing, drawing. These are all things that are possibilities for your alone time, for your solitude time. These are not, you notice I didn't put screen time on here, only because we are definitely locked on our screens already. We see our screens as connection often. And even if we don't, even if we know that that's not true connection or meaningful connection, it becomes our default. I do it, you do it. So what can we do then in place of it, along with those accountability partners? Then being the being and the doing list. I want to encourage you again that your being list is every and much as important as your doing list. It's critical. So I'm going to encourage you each day to try this and make both lists, a being list something that cultivates your being, who you are, your character. It's not about what you accomplish. It's about who you are, your inner being, and you're nourishing that inner being. Because what I believe about you is that all of us and all of you, each of you has wisdom, inner wisdom. It's amazing as I get older, ageism is real, but there is something, a stereotype that holds true when you get to be 63 and you've had all these life experiences. And then especially when I tell people I've raised 5 amazing kids to adulthood, I was married for 42 years and stayed committed and in that marriage for 41 of those 42 years. And I've had breast cancer, all these life experiences. And so people will say to me, oh, well, of course you have all of this experience. But what I find is that I'm still always learning parts of my story. I'm still discovering my inner child. I'm still trying to connect meaningfully to myself. And it all matters. And again, the culture around us says, well, too much reflection, too much time like that, where you're learning about yourself and self-awareness. All this focus on self is so selfish, or it's narcissistic. But really, I'm going to use a word here that I hope is not offensive to anyone. That's really our culture's bullshit. That narcissism is a word that gets thrown around all the time. And once words become very trendy and popular, that I noticed that they tend to lose all their meaning. And so there is a mental health diagnosis of narcissism, and narcissism is real. People are sometimes narcissists, both from a mental health diagnosis or that tends to be the way they show up a lot. And some of your behaviors, my behaviors from time to time may be narcissistic, but let's not call solitude time, alone time, and even reflection time, looking at our being, who we are really, and who is my inner child. All those brilliant questions about ourselves, those are not narcissistic, because when we're in relationship with other people and we've actually taken a good hard look in the mirror and taken a good hard look at ourselves, we actually do find that we are this person who is so complex and so deep, and the possibilities are endless of what we'll discover. I've discovered things at age 63 about myself that really surprised me. Let yourself be surprised by what you discover within yourself. Let yourself be surprised. And it takes a lot of courage to be facing some of the real you, that bad and ugly, those bad and ugly things that show up. It's a lot. And it's not narcissistic to face the fear of uncovering those parts of yourself and take some reflection time alone with yourself to face those and spend time doing it. And again, I want to talk about trauma informed. I want to speak to, sometimes you need someone to do that with you. You need a guide because of trauma responses. And I want to acknowledge that. It's really important to know what you're able to look at in terms of your being. Then there's also in solitude practice, just simple body movement and awareness, which is this. Sometimes when we're alone, one of the things you are able to do, if you are alone and you're finding yourself very, very sad and overwhelmed and lonely, or you're finding yourself with your thoughts spinning. Anybody ever have that where your thoughts are just spinning and spinning and you can't seem to get out of your head? happens all the time, right? To many of us. And that can happen in alone time. It's one of the things that will show up if you're intentional in building in some space and some solitude. And what we tend to do then is we tend to say, oh, this is too much and I'm overwhelmed by what's going on in my brain and all these thoughts and I've got to get out of my head. You're right. You probably do if that thought comes to you, but you don't necessarily need to get out the door for a walk if that seems too much at the moment, or it's not even possible. You don't necessarily need to do this huge amount of exercise, but we tend to think in either ors. YesToLife Coaching, that word yes, my favorite reason for choosing YesToLife Coaching, one of the reasons I named my coaching practice that is because yes, and we get locked into either or. Either I love alone time or I don't. Either I'm in my head or I'm not. And that is not actually true. There's a whole spectrum everywhere, all around us, and it's infinite. So a small body shift that you make, even right now, if your body, just notice, is your body stiff right now? Are you holding yourself with a lot of tension? What's your posture? And or if you're starting to lose your focus during this time that we have together, this small window of time where we get to be together and connect. If you're not focusing right now, all it might take is just this simple shift. So putting your hands up and just giving yourself a stretch and just making sure that you're moving. And just notice how good that feels. So body movement and awareness are actually ways to be just very present to making shifts that get you out of your head, that stop those spinning thoughts that you may be having when you're alone, especially, or even when you're in a group out in public, but you're alone with all these others and your head is just doing all of these things. Then there are things that you can do for creativity. One of the things I believe about you sitting here is that you are creative. And so many of us, again, our culture defines creativity in the ways that we define it. So if you're not a writer or you're not someone who you consider to be good at drawing. And of course, when you were a child, someone may have convinced you somehow that you can't draw at all. So you have to, again, this is practice. It's even showing up maybe and doodling. So thinking of yourself as creative, I believe it's in your DNA. That creativity is something we all have. And how it expresses ourselves is where it differs. And we need to realize that problem solving is creativity. If you're a problem solver, we need to start expanding it. But nourishing your creativity, your artist self, starting to think of yourself as an artist, that can be cultivated. Those are things that you can learn to do. I'm a huge fan of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way or Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. The Artist's Way is a course for 12 weeks. It's very intense. I have facilitated groups through The Artist's Way. But if you actually spend time every day creating, it's absolutely huge. The same thing is true of any kind of journaling. And let's get journaling again out of that box. Again, there's one of those words or those concepts of journaling that we tend to think of in either or, but it's a yes and. So finding the journaler in you and saying, well, and if you say, no, I will never journal. I've tried all these different things. Okay. But then what if you give yourself a prompt in the morning and instead of writing about that prompt, you actually just kind of speak it to yourself, and maybe even record yourself. Now, isn't that interesting? Record your answer to a prompt. You're journaling. You're just not doing it on a page because somehow along the line, that just isn't your thing. You don't enjoy writing. Artist dates are simply, according to Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way, she encourages us to go on dates with ourselves. And this is about filling your well, she calls it, where you're not actually being creative yourself, but you're feeding your creativity, you're nourishing it and cultivating it just by going to do something fun. One of the friends who actually joined my Artist's Way circle group, when I was facilitating that circle group, she said that one of her artist dates was going to a movie that had come out by herself, and that became her artist date. And she found it absolutely delightful. So really, anything you do, going for a walk in the woods is my default, or going to the beach. And here I have lots of beaches on Bainbridge Island from which to choose. So that's a possibility. Artist dates are wonderful. I'd love to talk to you more about them. The other thing, when you look over at writing as a possibility, and we were talking about journaling, Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way encourages morning pages. And our oldest daughter, Elizabeth, was the one that got me going on The Artist's Way years ago. So I have now been writing 3 pages each morning. That's a practice of mine. It's one of my morning practices, and I love it. 3 pages every day. It was really hard, and some days it's still really hard to write 3 pages, stream of consciousness. But that's what I do as a practice. I'd love to talk to you more about that if you're interested in trying it, or even giving yourself a little taste. It doesn't have to be those 3 pages, although Julia Cameron declares it to be quite magical in unleashing our creativity, unblocking. And I agree with her because I've been doing it for so long. And when I don't write my morning pages, there is a difference. And it's hard to define or explain. Building playlists for yourself is another way to practice solitude. So a wonderful thing to do, a very fun thing to do, might be creating a playlist for your solitude time. More than one, actually, because all of us change. Energetically, we're never the same. So you know that from how you wake up in the morning, you're never the same as you were the day before. There's always something different. And energetically, we know, even from a neuroscience perspective, our energy shifts all the time, our whole way of being. And even going to a movie by yourself, if it's a rough experience one time, that doesn't mean you should never do it again. There's that either or again, right? Either I enjoy going to movies by myself or I don't. But you will not be the same person sitting in a movie alone if you go a different day. You will be showing up differently, energetically, and you might find something. Or the people you're with, they're all different all the time too. Our environment changes all the time, and how we show up. So when I walk in the woods, not every walk that I have is magical. Many are, but many are not, because I'm showing up energetically in a way that I'm having trouble connecting around me. We are connected deeply to the world around us. We're all connected to one another. What happens on the other side of the world, it has an impact on us. And I believe we're all energetically connected, but we also shift and change all the time, which means that your alone time, your experiment, treat it like a science experiment. Treat your whole life like a science experiment. I love to say life is a giant science experiment. And it really is. And that includes your solitude time, your alone time. Singing and dancing is also something I do a good bit when I am alone. And as I told you, I'm alone quite often. But I actually find that if I start singing myself, this is not about listening to another person sing. This is about trying singing yourself. It can be amazing what begins to happen. When I taught first grade years ago, I would actually sing in my classroom a lot and sometimes make up silly songs, which of course, culturally, that's very acceptable amongst first graders, right? It's in childhood, making up a song. But what if you actually become that person that taps into your inner child and it's still culturally acceptable? Make it culturally acceptable for yourself. Yes, and same thing with dancing when you're alone. You don't need to be with another person all of the time. Now, sometimes that may be you just can't bring yourself to dance when you're alone. But getting over this self-consciousness too of feeling silly, these are all things you can practice. So what I'd like to do, and I'm trying to get to the next slide here. I don't know why it's not. So here we go. Maybe that'll do it. Okay, let me just do this. I don't know why it seems to be frozen. So what I'd like to do then is to, instead of moving to the next slide, I'm simply going to be.
Do you want to come out of screen sharing for a second, and then move on to the next slide and come back on? Maybe that will.
Yes, that might be a great way to do it. But again, my computer, my laptop seems to be doing something strange. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this screen up here and I'm going to continue because we're about to wrap it up so that I allow time for your questions. And what I want you to do is to picture 9 months where you are alone, completely alone for 9 months. If your mom delivered you, if your mother delivered you at 9 months, full term, then you did experience 9 months alone in her womb. You weren't alone, of course. You were inside of your mother. And you also, in that 9 months, were not alone if you have a faith that says there is a divine being and you were wrapped in divinity, or divinity is inside of you, whatever your faith says about the divine and whatever your spiritual practices, your spirituality are. For me, those are very much a part of my solitude. But picture yourself inside that womb and just acknowledging that not all of us were experiencing complete safety, but for the most part, you were protected and enveloped and allowed to grow inside that womb. So much alone time, so much stillness, even if you were moving and floating in this womb. And as you picture that, understand that that really is still a part of you, that allowing this cocoon, this beautiful wrapping of love around us and being alone in love for ourselves is so valuable and beautiful. And allowing yourself, perhaps not 9 months, most of us wouldn't choose that at all, but allowing yourself this time to float and be still. If you're familiar at all with a verse, be still and know that I am God. It's a Bible verse, and I know that it comes from other holy books as well. But this idea of being still, again, our culture does not support it. Our culture much more supports the doing and the action. And yet what happened inside that womb for 9 months? You grew, you developed. That was the whole purpose of being encompassed and by yourself, to grow and develop. And I want to encourage you to see solitude that way, to embrace it, to say, I need to find how to be still more. Even in the middle of a day, you can give yourself just a few minutes of time alone and do these check-ins. I have many questions, reflection questions. You can find them on my blog. So Katie, if you want to put my website in the chat, YTLcoaching.com, you can find on different blog posts of mine in the past, you can find those practices, those reflection questions. Coaching questions are just exactly like that. But you can also ask yourself, what am I experiencing right now in this moment? So check in with yourself in the middle of the day, especially if you have a very busy day. Learn not to see busyness and activity as a badge of honor. And our culture doesn't support you in that. But realize that productivity, what if it's producing something in you? What if it's just as productive to focus on your being and do a quick check-in with yourself? So there are many questions that you can ask yourself to check in, and I encourage you to do that. And I'm going to finish with a quote by someone who I consider one of my human heroes. He's a bit of an unusual human heroes. And it's Fred Rogers. If you're familiar years ago with the cardigan wearing sweater person called Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the show, the television show. And I'm a huge, huge fan of his. He is a human hero for me. And of course, he was very imperfect. And he talks a lot about that, actually, if you've ever looked at his life. And I actually spent time alone with Fred Rogers, who of course had passed on years before that, in Pittsburgh for my 60th birthday. I did a trip to visit with Fred Rogers, who of course was not here on Earth. So I just made that trip all about learning more about him. And he had a lot of what we would call his inner demons, his thoughts that tormented him too. And he would share that sometimes. And his practices, his solitude practices, grew from that. He learned, he was bullied a lot as a child in his neighborhood. And so he became an expert himself at being alone. And he began to find ways to make sure that he swam each day and would go swimming laps. And that was part of his alone time. So whatever works for you. But I hope that I have encouraged you to find who you are, the beautiful human you really are. And that includes all of you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You are complex. You are deep. Yes, and learning about yourself will make you your life so much richer. And when you show up to connect with others, when you do not have a lot of alone time, you will be grounded and better if you begin the morning alone, centering yourself and grounded. Every morning, I spend an inordinate amount of time grounding myself with morning practices. I'd be happy to share those with you. So, Katie, I really want to thank you. Fred Rogers' quote that I'll leave you with is, "Discovering the truth about yourself is a lifetime's work, but it's worth the effort."
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Dawn. So many tidbits there to think of, and definitely, like, I took away some nuggets myself, but I would love to open it up. We've got 8 people here, sure, with lots of experience as well. Does anybody have anything that came to their mind or questions or thoughts that were provoked. Maybe Dawn said something and you resonated with you. This might be a good time too, Dawn, to, oh, Kate, did you want to say something?
Hi, Kate.
If nobody else is coming in, I just really, I found that really inspiring and really, what's the word, affirming as well, because I think life, for me, I think it's a new journey for me to be valuing that alone time rather than sort of that kind of, I think I thought of it as lonely,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a bit like you sort of when you talked about going out walking and it seems like people are in couples or whatever. But now because I would say I'm an extrovert, but that absolutely needs alone time
Mm-hmm.
and I really love alone time in order to sort of re-energize and refresh and then a lot of things that I want to bring a bit more into my life you were touching on. So I have touched on that morning pages. I haven't kept it up, but that was really, I love that sort of stream of consciousness stuff because I do a bit of writing and stuff. And I know how cleansing it is and how valuable it is. So it's good to be reminded of that. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I'm glad that resonated with you. And yes, I love it when I meet someone else who's familiar with the term morning pages. It's quite something to see what happens when we start diving into these 3 pages. I still want to sit with Julia Cameron someday. As much as I've read that book through and through, and I've facilitated groups with it, I still think there's an element of magic, don't you, about those 3 stream of consciousness pages? What do you find, Kate?
Absolutely. And I'm sure there would be some actual science behind it. Some person will know some science behind it because
Yes.
it's pulling out something from the subconscious that actually is important, you know, in a similar way to sort of we have dreams and that's about processing. Our brain is processing, and I'm sure there's something. And I always find that something shifted or I feel a bit more cleansed once I've just written, and it can be anything. It could not, it doesn't even have to make sense. But yeah, so just write.
Yes, yes. And for those of you not familiar with morning pages at all, and you've never heard of it, and you hear us talking about stream of consciousness, another way that she terms morning pages would be just a brain dump. It's literally when you get up in the morning, first thing, just dump out there in writing. And she does advocate, do it in writing on pages. And she says 3, but it's this brain dump of what's showing up for you. Now, if you're a person that you try it and there's no way anything's coming forth, prompts are great. In fact, usually when I facilitate a group around the Artist's Way, many people in many of my people who've done the Artist's Way, they find that they have to start with prompts and that it's actually really helpful. And again, that can be your brain dump, is giving yourself an open-ended question. Coaches call them powerful questions, but giving yourself this open-ended question and then dumping from your brain exactly what's there, and try to do it right off the top, no filters. And it's really hard because sometimes we're even self-conscious that somebody's going to find our journals. Under my bed right now live many, many full journals. And I have had conversations with, particularly with our daughters, around what am I going to do? What might happen to these journals? And do I want my children, my adult children, reading through them after? Yeah. And what if things are hurtful that they read or hard? I mean, Some of them have the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my daughter has challenged me and said, don't you find that you still write with the idea that somebody might read this? Isn't that there? Sure. Yes, and I'm going to keep writing and trying to speak the truth and write the truth of what's inside of me. Yes, and of course I'm self-conscious. I'm human. Of course I'm aware that somebody might be reading it, but I work hard. I practice at writing without that self-consciousness. It's all about practice, one moment at a time, one day at a time.
I love that.
Yes.
Had somebody in, thank you so much for sharing, Kate. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Kate has been a follower of some of our Wellness Wednesdays, and she's participated week after week. So thank you so much. And yes, I love that. Just fills my heart. Dorcas looks like she has a comment in the chat as well.
Okay.
I also resonate with myself during the holidays. Yeah, my husband and I just have like Thanksgiving or Christmas together sometimes, but you see it all, everybody else together, but it's okay to celebrate alone. Yeah.
Yes. I love alone time, but struggle with high days and holidays when others are all together. I must remember that they may not be as happy as they appear. Oh my goodness. Yes. I so relate to that, Dorcas. That's the human experience, to compare ourselves with others. And comparison, any comparisons that we make, we'll always find people who, on the one hand, seem to be doing it better than we are, or have better relationships, or those who are worse. But on high days and holidays, I struggle if I'm going to be alone. I don't want to be alone on those days. I want community. And our culture, again, gives that full support. It was so fun to be sitting actually at a restaurant in Denver. And for a lot of reasons, I chose to sit alone at the bar. And I actually was connecting with the bartender and with the restaurant manager as a part of that alone time. So I wasn't completely alone. But what was interesting is right before Thanksgiving, and they were telling me some things they were going to do alone on the holiday. They were going to be with other people for a portion of it. And it was beautiful to hear that they were finding their solitude time because their lives were so busy that the holiday for them wasn't only about being alone. But for someone who's craving to be in community for a holiday, it becomes so difficult. So I so relate to that, Dorcas. And I'm curious, I love it that you remember and remind yourself. That's self-managing. You're reminding yourself they might not be as happy as they appear. And that's so true. If you go to a place, a restaurant, or a place where people are sitting around tables, and there's a couple at this table and a group at this table, reminding yourself that even when they're laughing hysterically over something, or there's a lot of fun banter and the energy is just so fun, we have to remind ourselves. And it sounds like you do this really well, Dorcas, is you remind yourself, oh, I'm only seeing this moment in time. And what if someone at the table is really deeply lonely or sad or afraid or anxious, but in that moment, someone made them laugh? What if it took every bit of courage in them to even go out in a group? That happens too. So self-management is critical.
Looks like Kate has her hand up.
Great.
Oh, yeah. All I was going to say, I think that was such a good point about those high days and holidays and that. And I also find on that, because it is just me and my partner and the dog, sort of Christmas and things like that now, because of parents not being here and family spread. But even though it's okay. I feel there's a stigma around, in the sense of,
Yes.
if I sort of say that, it's people like, oh, right. And, I feel like I have to explain myself, and and I think that's hard, because some people, maybe, I'm not saying they'd be happy alone, but I think they'd be happier alone or with fewer people if there wasn't this stigma or that sort of stuff about being alone, if you know what I mean. It's like, oh, you must be lonely. And you might not be, or you might, or you'd be less lonely if there wasn't such an expectation that you must be in community. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kate. You are so right. The stigmas are endless, and social media is part of what has contributed to that in spades, just exponentially. When we spend so much time on social media, putting our public selves out there, or the best of us, or even the raw stuff that people put out on social media sometimes, where they're trying to be very authentic and show up authentically and honest. It isn't the full them. It's not. And it's a part of their story that they're giving us a window into, and a moment in time in which they're sharing it. Social media, it really has to be managed well if you're going to scroll through social media, right? Lots of self-management, lots of reminders. So thank you, Kate and Dorcas, for both of those.
All right. We have 3 minutes left. So this has been recorded, and as usual, I'll follow up with an email with the link to the recording on YouTube, and Dawn will make sure we get all your information. I did add your website in the chat early on, and we'll include Dawn's website, her LinkedIn, and anything else, any materials, handouts you want to include, Dawn, in the follow-up email.
Yes, and I do want to put my email in the chat as well, so that you are able to contact me if you'd like to ask me questions, if anything else comes to mind. I know that because the rest of the slides weren't working for me, or my laptop was doing something funky, technology is only great when it works, then I want to make sure that you're getting the resources. And I do have some links to resources that are in my blogs that are actually just free questions, prompts for you to use. You'll find them in my blogs, but if you don't want to go digging for them, send me an email and I'll be happy to do that. And also, I am just so grateful to you for this time together, Katie. I'm really grateful. And I want to say that there is a whole world beyond the world we see, the material world. And I didn't get to that part of my presentation because I wanted to make sure I honored time for your questions. But I encourage you to be curious about the world beyond what we see and the material world, because solitude really is able to connect you to that. So Prayers, Poems, and Promises is from the John Denver song. If you've ever heard that song by John Denver, Poems and Prayers and Promises. And there's just a whole world. And even when we're out walking in the woods or on the beach or where we love to walk, there's a whole world that isn't visible necessarily. And the more we learn to connect to it and listen, it's about listening, the more that we're going to be meaningfully connected and understand that there's a magic happening all around us.
What a wonderful way to end. I'm going to end it there. Yes, thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we'll see you next week for a different Wellness Wednesday topic. Bye.
Thank you.